and welcome back. My name is Clay Gregory, and I'm coming in live from Mettle Labs. We have an esteemed gentleman back again, and we have Ms. Denise, who is a talented clinician here at the Mettle Works team. And for those who didn't watch the first time that we had you, Dr. Holt, I'd like for you just to kind of give them a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Dr. Holt. I am a traumatologist, a trauma crisis specialist, brain health specialist, and board certified integrative medicine doctor. And pretty much what I do is I get to deal with some of the world's most heinous evils. And some of the experiences of the worst nightmares that humanity can endure coming from trauma, and look at how it impacts the five parts of a person that impacts the whole person. I always say it impacts your neurology, your brain and nervous system. It impacts your psychology, your emotions, and how you process information. It impacts your physiology, which is your healthy organs and tissue. It impacts your spirituality, where trauma can get so deep and so intrusive it can do a tearing in the soul of a human person.
Okay.
And it also impacts your biology. And so I look at those things, how it impacts gene expression in our DNA. And I'm kind of like the big researcher in this, and I'm the architect of a new framework. You probably heard of trauma informed care. And I architect the brainchild of trauma resilient wellness. And that's where I believe in the next generation of trauma has to have a resilient component to it, to really help people to shift from just surviving in fight or flight and thriving in wellness, where the whole person is a better version of themselves.
Wow, and that's a whole mouthful there. So let's start with kind of unpacking a little bit, a
Okay.
bit of that. We hear
Yes.
trauma informed care.
Yes.
And up until learning about the great work that you've done, I thought that was like the cutting edge of it. But
Yeah.
what is trauma informed care lacking or missing?
Trauma informed care is lacking tools and strategies to actually, where people can utilize to bring heighten their emotional intelligence and promote emotional regulation, to where they can actually deal with their traumas and help them to abound. Trauma informed I think, is where I think we should have started. It really describes the neuroscience of the issues of trauma, what it does to the different regions of the brain and the nervous system, and it explained the neurobiological ramifications. But the limitations of trauma informed care is, now that I know what I know, and now that I understand what it does to me, the limitation was in trauma informed care was, what do I do about it, and how do I bring the healing space? So it kind of shares revelation on what is going on, but it really didn't give us enough application of the next level on tools and strategies on what we should do to bring healing.
Good.
So it sounds like trauma informed care is putting the problem under a microscope, and trauma resiliency is coming up with solutions.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
So trauma informed is the diagnosis, and trauma resilience is kind of like the prognosis of what we do.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And I want to ask you this question, and
Sure.
Denise, I also want you to chime in as well.
Absolutely.
When we think of the word trauma, especially in today's, in the sense that we hear of traumatic events
Yes.
and people who've been traumatized, but is it accurate that the word trauma is like an all bad thing? Like let's what is actually trauma, and is it just all bad?
That's a good question. I think in this era we blame everything on trauma,
Mm.
and some challenges is not traumatic at all. And I think we need to decipher between the fact that am I just going through life challenges versus a real traumatic experience, and those are two different things. So going back to your original question, I think is very important. What in the world, Dr. Holt, is trauma? According to the American Psychological Association, they define trauma as a psychological wound and an emotional injury that can be based on something physical, emotional, verbal, or sexual. How I break it down as a traumatologist is pretty much trauma is an emotional injury. It's an emotional injury and a psychological wound to the brain. So when life devastating things happens to a person that's on a traumatic spectrum, then it actually create these injuries to different regions of the brain. Like people that's been through a lot of trauma have a hypersensitive amygdala. And if that amygdala is too hypersensitive, it doesn't assess information right. And so sometimes they can be dissociative to people who's actually showing love to them because they just see everyone is an issue. So that's just one way. But to break it down, it's really three things. It's a psychological wound. Two, it's an emotional injury. And three, this is what we forget, is trauma is also a stress that is overly whelming to cope with it. So it almost make you have near levels of anxiety disorders or anxiety type of experience or breakdown or panic attack because the triggering of that trauma from your hippocampus, your episodic and emotional memory, triggers you in such a way, it gets you really revved up and rattled up, and you can really have an anxiety experience as well.
Wow.
So it almost sounds like in that sense, how you describe that is that um, you're constantly triggered by an event that you remembered in a way that impacted you negatively, right?
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
one Clay's question was, is trauma good or bad, or can it be good or bad? I think in the sense of how you just described it, that's how I sum it up.
Yeah.
But to answer Clay's question, trauma can serve to protect you, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
as a child, if you go to a hot stove and you touch it, it burns you, and that can be a traumatic
Most
experience, and
definitely.
you remember that.
Yeah.
So when you see that stove or anything that resembles
Yeah.
that stove, you might avoid it
Yeah.
to avoid the negative consequence of being burnt.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
yes, and I agree with that. And I was going to add too, trauma can have a benefit because that's how we train our Navy SEALs. We have to rewire and shock the brain and put them in some extreme traumatic experiences so that they can run into danger where the average person will run from danger.
Gotcha.
We do it with police officers, we do it with firefighters as well. So there's a level of how we have to rewire the brain through trauma to re-engineer our responses to run towards danger to save lives.
Yeah. It reminds me of the movie with Denzel Washington where Dakota Fanning is in the movie, and he's actually a bodyguard living in Mexico City, and the character who's Dakota Fanning, she gets kidnapped, and he's on a tear. Man on Fire is the name of the movie.
Yeah, I remember.
But there's a part of the movie where she is she's a swimmer, and he says to her, "You're the fastest one in the pool, but you're the last one off of the blocks." And so he begins the process of training her to not flinch when the starting gun goes off, because when it goes off, she tenses up before jumping in. So he starts to kind of train her so that in informing her that you want to wire your brain to say, when you hear that gunshot go off, it's almost like you're being released, And so, to that point that you're making, Dr. Holt, about how the training that goes into the Navy SEALs, how it happens.
And they go through deep trauma. I mean, like
imagine.
in the cold water for hours, just really just taking them to that breaking point. But it's those triggerings that they're going to need when they're going into really hot, crazy war zones to be able to respond in such a way to save lives,
Yeah.
and so so in certain special circumstances, to traumatize the brain for training
Mm.
and to things like that is very necessary to get the body to respond in fight or flight in a positive way
Yeah.
to actually make a difference.
And so, in that way, I think, and Dr. Holt, you certainly know more about this than I do. Would you say that that would prevent an anxious response if you're kind of conditioned to respond to trauma as a Navy SEAL in that way? You wouldn't be as anxious because you've experienced it
Yeah.
in a certain way?
Yeah, and I think it can get complex, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
on a war zone, I need you to be able to rewire the brain to respond into certain ways, and so we have to also do some desensitive trainings to desensitize you to not respond in a way a normal human being will respond when they see a certain bomb explode and you still just like guns blazing and not
Mm-hmm.
respond to it. But the trick side is when you're no longer in the war zone and it's time to reintegrate your family and
Mm.
society, how do we turn that switch back on as well?
Yeah.
So we can see on both sides how it can go either way, and we also began to see those type of problems. Is okay, Dad, now you're home, but you're so dissociative and so detached that we have to now turn that switch back on. So yeah, the brain. But the good thing about the brain is more resilient than what we give it credit for.
Yeah.
With the right treatments and therapies and things of that nature, support networks, we can rewire the brain back into a healing space.
Yeah. So, and what I heard you do is lay out a number of ways in which the effects or the body's capacity to create certain protocols allow traumas to be beneficial to a person in accomplishing certain tasks, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
you use the example of the Navy SEALs. Uh, where is it and how is it that certain communities have this capacity to traumatize, over traumatize, like say for instance, children
Mm-hmm.
or in young adults,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates such devastating effects.
Oh yeah, I can go several ways with that. I think even to get soldiers to be into gangs, you have to rewire the brain
Mm.
to violence
Mm.
and in such a way to where, you're just so desensitized to violence and gory type of sceneries. You going out grabbing a gun, you spraying the house down, killing everybody. That's a lot of the extreme traumas. Let me talk about the three E's. So when I'm teaching on traumatology, I talk about the three E's of trauma, which is your experience, which is your events and your exposures.
Mm.
Usually, when you are in any kind of level of trauma, you have those kind of three categories of an experience and an event or an exposure. Trauma is not just happens or impacts the brain during a direct event or experience. You can also be traumatized by exposures,
Mm.
and so we see that with children, which is very concerning for me because this is during the key times of brain development and neural development. And so childhood trauma and unresolved trauma impacts those brains. So not just rewiring it, but smaller brains. It also impacts the maturity of the brain, which I'm also seeing now. This is Frederick Douglass said. He said it's far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
Mm.
So a lot of people that's coming into Mettle Works, for behavioral health and mental health support. Boy, if we would have caught them at 7 years old,
Mm-hmm.
what would their outcomes would be? And so, children that's been through a lot of trauma and exposed a lot of trauma, it impacts their brain as well. But it's more dangerous because it's during those key times of brain development where they can have social, behavioral, and cognitive impairment, which we began to see when they began to get into K3 education. We began to see those issues far as frontal lobe hijacking. They can't process curriculum instruction. They're imploding in education.
Mm.
They can't regulate their behavior. So these are the kids that's being highly referred out of class. They've been suspended, expelled. And then if we don't catch them, early childhood trauma turns into school to prison pipeline. Now these kids is in juvenile detention centers. So it's a lot of ways you can go with it, but the quicker we can help people through their traumatic experiences, the better their outcome's going to be. And we have to normalize depression like we do diabetes.
Mm. So in the Southern Christian culture that we come from, spanking is a common practice.
Yes.
And matter of fact, it's something that is used and perceived to be a valuable tool. What's your take on spanking? Is that um, does the results from spanking lead to a positive outcome?
I think it can. I think that spanking is one form of discipline.
Okay.
I think in certain homes, it's the only form of discipline.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other ways how we can bring discipline. And I think discipline is good and discipline has its place. And I do think that there are times where if the verbal or reprimand is not working and you're not listening, I think that there's a place for spanking. But that's going to look different for every home. Some people do it moderately, just in case it's something crazy and extreme. Okay, I got to spank you. And there's some that, say, that's not what we're going to do in our home. We're going to have other mechanisms of discipline.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's nothing wrong with, spanking or a tap on that butt to help you, like, hey, you need to recognize, And it's really preparing you, giving you life skills for the future, right? Because things can bring harm to you. So you might get a spanking. Number one, respecting your parents. Two, if you're putting yourself in danger, and I'm warning you over and over and over, so you might need to get, a little spanking. But spanking and I believe, physical abuse is two different things, and I think that's when we start getting into that crazy traumatic experience where we start abusing kids. Kids got black eyes and broken bones and things of that nature. That's when we start getting into more of the traumatic experience. And so, but I think it's going to be case by case on how parents want to make a decision, how they address behavior. Yeah. But if someone most definitely say, hey, I had to spank them, that doesn't alarm me as much as someone who's been abused. And you don't have to hit kids all the time,
right,
to shape and mold them to have good behavior. There's other things that you can do as well.
Yeah.
So just want to throw that in there because some families think that is the only way of discipline.
Yeah.
And that's not. So
yeah,
I have a follow-up question. So Dr. Holt, do you think that physical discipline, even in a moderate way, as you described, do you think that it has the potential to create violent responses from children when they now interact with others who don't do what they want them to do or expect them to do? Do you think that they can tend to respond in the same way the parent did to them when the parent asked them to do something that they didn't do? Do you think it
yeah, I think that's I think that's very possible, and I think that's why I'm delicately saying there should be other mechanisms in place. One, if you have to do spanking, there should be an explanation of why I'm doing this. There should be a teaching moment, not just so punitive, right, that it's so harshly done to where there's no explanation, because that's a lot of times parents do that. Oh, I had to tear that tail up, right? And why did you do it? So I think there's a teaching moment on, sitting down, I think it's very important that afterwards you say, okay, I know I had to spank you, and that's normally something I don't do, but you took it there, and I want to explain why and what was the teaching moment, so I don't have to do this again. So I think that's one. Number two. Number two is if you do spanking, I want to really see your nurturing, because I think a lot of times parents think that that's the only way of doing something, but you also got to nurture kids too, so they can know it's coming from a space of love. You went through many tears of trying to do corrective action, and you just wasn't getting it, so you had to get that. Then you sit down and explain why that had to take place, and I really don't feel comfortable having to do that because I don't want to do that, but if it's necessary, that's what I do. But then you solidify it with love, letting them know, like, this is a teaching moment and things like that. But you're right, like, if we don't put that nurturing piece and that attachment piece to it, yeah, those can turn into bad behaviors too, and then kids can end up becoming bullies and feel like, oh, I can just put my hands and do whatever too. So I think when we balance it out and make sure that it's fostering out of love and it's nurturing, and I have an attachment, and I know just as well. In other words, balance. Yeah, yeah, I had to spank you. I didn't really want to go there. But if you're getting A's and B's and you're doing your chores and you're doing great things too, I'm gonna celebrate you too. So it's like you gotta have that balance thing. Like, okay, if I had to take you there, I don't mind doing that, but I reward you too when you're doing great things.
Yeah, I grew up in a household where my parents were spankers,
Oh, mine was too, brother.
and I can recall the first time getting spanked. I'd like to believe I can remember every time in which I got spanked. One of the most impactful points in my development that informed the type of parenting style I was going to choose was when I was 16 years old, and I was walking past my father's office, and I heard him on the phone speaking to someone. And for those of you guys who don't know, my father was a pastor, and he was, was an educated and well-read person.
Okay.
And, right there at the age of 16, I was walking past his office, and he said to whoever he was on the phone with that he regretted, the fact that he had spanked my sister and I. And he thought that had he done it over, that he would have taken a different approach and style to parenting. And so, certainly I can empathize and understand the utilization of spanking. But to turn this kind of into a question, when you think of, the experiences of our ancestors who came out of the South, right? Where there were colored water fountains. And there were certain places where you could and you could not go. And the idea is that if I needed your attention and I needed you to respond with immediacy, because this, not only could it be a threat to your life, but it could be an entire threat to our family and our community, that it was a valuable tool. But now when you think of society and where we are, where it's the stakes aren't as high, in those moments or instances. The question ends up being is, how do we revisit and review these type of practices just to make sure that we're using the appropriate measurement?
Because everything doesn't require the hammer.
Right.
There are other tools that
should have way other interventions and tools at the table. I was saying that at the beginning, like before you even got there, how do we escalate to there? Like we had tier 4. Like, what was your tier 1 strategy before you pulled the belt out, right? And you're so right. And again, I think a lot of the number one comes from, believe it or not, a lot of our parents wasn't nurturing. They were hard workers. They put food on the table. They made sure we had a roof over our head. There's parents that never said "I love you" to kids, and they whooping them. Right? They never gave them hugs and embraced them. And they're beating on them. Right? So I think that's, and a lot of that come from our traumatic experiences, generational stuff passed down to us.
Absolutely.
And belts, stitching cord. I couldn't even imagine whooping a kid with a stitching cord. I'm like, oh my God. Especially what I know now in my work. I'm like, oh, I'm really bringing some trauma into my house. But a lot of times though, there were a lot of deficits in our families when it came to discipline. So behaviors were passed down, right? So your dad, if he was harsh on whooping, he probably came from a household that was generationally transferred to him, correct?
That's
right? So that was kind of like ways we had. We didn't have that additional education. We didn't understand trauma. We didn't understand mental health. And then we have a lot of family secrets. So we said whatever goes on in this house stays in this house. So there's a lot of social behavioral things that we struggle with that was passed down to us. But now we're learning more about trauma, and we're learning about mental health and things of that nature, to where kids can really be struggling mentally and emotionally because of the lack of affection, the lack of nurturing, the lack of just saying I love you. That it most definitely impact kids in the long run, to where it festers into their adulthood. So it's very important for us to delve back and start saying, now that I know what I know now, how would I, because I was a spanker too, and and I went, as my kids got older, I apologized. I literally apologized to him and said that, I probably should have handled that a different way. And, and a lot of times, let's be honest, some of our whoopings came from our parents' trauma. They didn't know how to manage anger, didn't know how to have emotional regulation, right? They totally dysregulated, about to kill us, right?
Yeah.
Even told us, I brought you into this world, I
out.
will take you out. You're like, wait a minute, you
Yeah.
gonna take me out?
Exactly.
For real? Like, you gonna take your kid out?
Yeah, literally.
But when you really process it, now that we're educated and we got some skill and we got some discernment,
Yeah.
and we can psychoanalyze, we're like, man, wow, like my life was on the line. I was about to die. So, but as you go delve back, and I think you should.
Yeah.
Because once you know better, you do better, right? And you have to also have a level of accountability as a parent and say, you know what, I didn't get it right all the time.
Yeah.
Your father did it. I did it with my kids. And my kids gave me some grace. Oh, Dad, and at the time, I raised them. I got, 4 kids, but my older kids, I was raising them as a single parent. So there was a lot of stress on me. I couldn't be repeating myself. I'll tell you right now. Like, I'm working, I'm doing all this before. I cannot be repeating myself about your behavior. You're going to get it. But as I got older and, began to become a trauma doctor and be trained and understand, you're like, maybe I need to deal with something. And then also on the discipline was so punitive that we also had to start saying, what can restorative justice even look like in our homes? I don't even think that's just a school model or an organizational model. I think it should be a family model, on how we, be more restorative in our approaches.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just piggyback on what Clay was saying, because this weekend I ran across something. And it said 9 things that was born out of racism. And one of the things that, the number one thing was beatings, spankings, that traditionally that came from out of slavery, because parents, that's their way of protecting their children, because if the children were doing something that, master saw and it was inappropriate to them, they weren't going to spare them the harshness. The parent would beat them, but master might beat them to death. And
that's right.
That's one of the things. And also another thing that was on the list was just undermining our children's achievements, their brilliance, their smarts. We would do that because if they knew that they were smart and capable, they may ship them out to somewhere else and your family would be separated, right? And so there's a lot of things that a lot of traumas that we experience now currently that were born out of a time when that was the only tool we had. Right. Like I said, the hammer was the only thing that we had. But now as we come into times where things have changed and we're a little more educated and knowledgeable, when you know better, do better. And it is your obligation and responsibility to figure out what you can do instead of just using the hammer all the time.
That's right.
I like that because, and I think it goes back to what I was saying, what I realized was if I worked on the proactive end with nurturing and love and built that healthy relationship with my kid, I really just all I had to do is give them a look.
Absolutely.
All I have to do is give them a look, and because that love and nurturing was there and that respect was there, that's all it took for them. It devastated them to know that I was disappointed.
Exactly.
Like, wow.
It's funny you said that because my son's dog, right? If he did something, he recently passed away, but if he did something that he wasn't supposed to do, all my son has to do is
give him the look.
He doesn't even have to give him a look. He can be in the other room and sees or hears that he's doing something he's not supposed to do. And the minute he hears, he stops and he sits and he lays down.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a conditioning that takes place pretty early. But when I look at the spanking, I think that, and I'm speaking from a personal perspective because I endured a lot of spankings growing up, and it made me extremely violent. And I didn't
Yeah.
understand that until I got older and
Yeah.
went through my own
Yeah.
therapy, and
Yeah.
got to a
Yeah.
point where I was like, yeah, that wasn't too good for me.
Yeah,
Right?
and you're right. And I noticed families that had high levels of spanking did not do a lot of nurturing,
No,
right?
at all.
So that's a big missing piece, is that nurturing and that attachment. Like, can you just hug me?
Yeah.
Can I get a
Yeah.
hug?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know what? You ain't said I love you to me in 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, and believe it or not, when you look at it, and I was going to ask you, like, you had high levels of physical discipline. What did the nurturing look like? What did the affection look like? And a lot of times our families thought, I go out here and work, bust my butt out here, and I work for the white man. I do all of this and put food on your table. That's my affection, right?
Yeah.
That's like, no, your children need that nurturing. They need that love and that care, that attachment. And believe it or not, I can handle your discipline, especially when it's balanced with love. Like
Yes.
I know you love me. I know it comes from a space of care, and resilience. So if you gotta pull me on the carpet every now and then, I can digest that too, because I know it don't come from a space of abuse. It comes from a place of love.
Yeah. So with trauma, there's a gentleman, Dr. Paul Conti, is a well-respected psychiatrist who wrote a pretty famous book on trauma, and in his book he mentions how the evil or the evil accomplice to trauma is shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he talks about is, if you think of that child who is being abused in the house, there is the abuse that's happening, but then there's this story, the narrative that this person is telling themselves on the inside, you know, and that is where some of the biggest uh, damage is happening, right? Because if I'm being abused in my house, right, there's this potential narrative that I'll say to myself, which that is, it's happening because I deserve it. It's happening because I'm the weakest one. I'm the slowest one.
If
I'm
I
the
can only be
ugliest one.
better,
If I could only be better,
smarter,
right?
if I can only be, yes.
Yeah. And so when you think of trauma resiliency, how important is it for us as individuals or who have been victimized to be able to overcome that shame of it?
That's really good. Most definitely there's a lot of shame that takes place. But one of the things that I also thought about in trauma resiliency, and we talk about healing, and that sounds like a little bit of imposter syndrome too, where we're questioning ourselves: are we good enough? Things of that nature. But I think we also underestimate the power of grief. I don't. It's difficult to really become trauma resilient if you don't deal with the. I know we talk the neuroplasticity and all of that stuff, and I believe in all of that. But I think that grieving is important, because grieving is more than someone passing away. Obviously, it's part of that. It's a major loss when you lose a loved one. But really, grief is about grieving a situation anytime there's a major loss or a major change. So that doesn't just mean that someone has to pass away for people to grieve. And I think we limited there, so we didn't even really infuse that into the trauma resilient piece. So I look at it as, based on my research, grief is the power to process pain. So a lot of times we endure the pain, but we never processed it, right? And that's very important when we talk about getting to that healing version, even to the point of it's difficult to walk in true forgiveness if you never processed the pain. You endured it, you felt it, but processing it is a whole nother thing. And it's difficult for people to get to that other end. For example, you just don't grieve a person that passed away. A daughter needs to grieve that she never had her father in her life.
Yeah.
because it's going to be hard for you to get to that space of forgiving your father for his absenteeism if you never process that pain. Is that kind of making sense?
Totally.
Right. So if you go through a really bad divorce, it's not just someone passing away. I think divorcees, and I have to go through it, is go through a process of actually grieving
Yeah.
that death-like experience, because it does feel like death,
Yeah.
even though it's
the loss of
yeah,
something.
it's a loss of something,
Yeah.
right? So we have always limited grief to only be when someone passed away. It's anytime you have a major loss. So if I'm going through a bad divorce or a bad breakup with a significant other, I need to process that pain before I get into that next relationship. Or it's gonna go to, like I said, if we don't heal from our trauma, we bleed on people that didn't cut us. We got VA veterans that have worked 20 years in a VA just got terminated last week. Should they grieve that their whole livelihood was just taken from them, right?
Yeah.
Yes, because it's hard for you to get to that version of healing without not just enduring the pain, feeling the pain, but processing that pain, the power to process that pain. And that is something God gives us with grace to be able to do as well. So I don't know why I'm led that way, but that's a missing piece that we're talking about. This work in trauma resiliency is going through those stages of grief, feeling angry sometimes and feeling like you're bargaining and feeling like you're depressed. And it's not in chronological order,
Yeah.
right?
I get that.
It'd be all over the place. And then sometimes you get to a place where you feel like I'm good.
Yeah.
And
Where you
then
reconcile.
and then that anniversary date comes back and you re-triggered all over again. So it's this daily fight of actually flowing and walking to grieving and normalizing grieving, not to be an emotional weak person. Like, I don't want to be crying all day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time we stay away from grief. I'll give you another example. So we're dealing with a lot of the returning citizens. So in my work is when the last time my fellow brothers and sisters who was in incarceration had a time to grieve? They couldn't grieve because they was trying to survive the moment. They trying not to get raped, sexually assaulted, beaten, shanked, all of that. Your grieving process is stuck for 20 years as long as you're in there because you have not been able to even process the pain of losing your freedom. The pain of you not being able to see your kids and all of that. So that's a huge, major piece, in my opinion, that as we're talking about this space of healing, is that we also have to allow ourselves to go through a grieving period, which is very healthy for us.
Yeah. One of our earlier videos in the social media space is Denise working with one of our staff members who had unprocessed grief over the fact that he wasn't allowed. He missed the opportunity to be there for a daddy-daughter dance. And Denise was able to help him identify that what he was experiencing was grief. And Denise, I'm going to turn that to a question of the percentage of participants in our partial hospitalization program, whether in particular for SUD, so substance use disorder, those who have addiction disorder.
Yes.
How many? What would you say would be the number of individuals who have some unprocessed grief? That's a part of the basket that is triggering. The relapse and addiction.
I would say 100% of them.
Wow.
Because I'm listening to Dr. Holt, and a big part of them not being able to grieve is being afraid to be vulnerable. In order to grieve, you absolutely have to be vulnerable. And sometimes when I do my individual sessions as well as when I do my group sessions, I say, you have to get naked. You have to strip down to nothing and be able to bare your soul in order to heal, process trauma, and reconcile the experiences that you've had. And so I would say 100% of them are suffering some loss and have not grieved because they're also afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that's deep. That's deep. There was a case that was brought to my attention of someone who was dealing with a traumatic event that happened in their life. It was a lady who was in a car accident, and she was injured so severely she was unconscious, and she had broken quite a few bones in her body,
Yeah.
some of the core bones, and so she had to be medevaced to a hospital that could care for the injuries that she had, and so she rode in this helicopter, and she was, this was 15 or 20 years after the fact. She was dealing with challenges that were tied to that traumatic event. But the key to it was the fact that after extensive sessions, they were able to uncover that, this helicopter ride was one of the bridges that would trigger some of the disorders and the things that she was having. So, this is something that consciously she wasn't aware that she was in this helicopter ride. But after, extensive therapy, they were able to deduce that this was a part of the root, areas that was bringing her challenges. Is trauma that deep in our community? Like, we know the surface stuff. So, you got this child was sexually abused.
Yeah.
This person was physically abused. This person saw someone get shot. Like, we can process that.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the subconscious stuff? What about the multi-generational pieces?
And the epigenetic.
The epigenetics.
Yeah. So, that's a really good question. And I get that all the time. Dr. Holt, is it possible for people to even suffer from trauma without even acknowledging it? And if that is so, then how? And the answer is yes. So we know we have 4 hemispheres in the brain, but in the mind we have 3 different regions. And so we have the conscious mind, what we cognitively process and think about. But a lot of our traumas can get so deep that it surpasses conscious mind, that we're cognitively processing it to where it goes into our unconscious mind. Then there's something called the subconscious mind. So a lot of our pains can get so deep, it passes conscious mind to unconscious and subconscious. This is where we're not cognitively aware of those things, right? But the thing about, even if it being an unconscious mind, we still show it in our behaviors. So we're not really conscious of sometimes of what would have happened to us, but it sits deep down into our unconscious mind. This is why sometimes we have to go past cognitive behavior therapy, our CBTs, our DBTs, our EDMRs, and we have to go deep into hypnotherapy, where we have to put people under trance of hypnosis and go into the unconscious mind and reprogram those bad programmings that has happened to someone to actually promote healing. So, and the unconscious mind is very, very powerful. And a lot of things that it happens to us in our lives also comes from unconscious mind stuff that we haven't even thought of. And you be like, why is this person so negative? They cognitively don't even think about how negative they are. But that negative energy is deep in their unconscious mind that promotes a negative manifestation in how they walk, how their demeanor, how they talk, how they carry themselves, how they engage. So to answer your question, can, trauma gets way past just a prefrontal cortex issue or an amygdala issue or a thalamus issue? Absolutely. It gets down into that unconscious mind, and sometimes we have to reprogram those bad programmings, not just through hypnosis, but hypnotherapy, which is totally different, because it's more doing that reprogramming those bad programmings because of traumatic experiences, so that people can have a better and healed version of themselves. So it's very possible. Trauma is really, really deep, that it goes even past mind. It goes into impacting a person's broken spirit. And this is where they have low self-esteem, low value. And when you get to that critically low place, this is when you begin to be acting out for attention and doing a lot of risky behavior, which is self-medicating, create addictions. Young ladies sometimes can be promiscuous out there, and really, she's out there, doing what she's doing, but she's really looking for love and intimacy because that was lacking, right? Because of all of the trauma that they've been through. Or a brother can be hypersexual, having kids all over the place, right? Like, bruh, slow down. But it's more than that. It's we're not dealing with our unresolved trauma, so we're acting out in these different things, and we're just saying, I'm ready to heal. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of this, and I want something different for my life.
Um, I read a book a while back called "It Didn't Start with You,"
Mm.
and it talks. It's closely linked to epigenetics, but it
Yeah.
talked about one particular case where a young man was having severe anxiety
Yeah.
and depressive symptoms, and every night he would go to sleep, and after falling asleep, he would wake up to feeling chills and
Yeah.
feeling panicky.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to someone who did hypnotherapy,
Chemotherapy.
and it was discovered that when his mom was pregnant with him, her brother, who worked for the power company in Canada or something, they had a blackout one night. It was really stormy and snowy, and he went out to repair a power line and never came home because he froze to death. And that really, really weighed on his mother heavily,
Mm.
right? And so when he uncovered that and he went back to his mom and told his mom what he had discovered, that he's under hypnosis,
Mm-hmm.
he had thoughts that he was outside in the snow and he froze to death. And his mother told him the story of her brother,
Yeah.
who was his uncle, how he died when she was pregnant. So I say that to say sometimes it can be so subconscious that
Yeah.
you didn't literally
Yeah,
experience it,
exactly.
but your
Well,
mom
you
or
pass
your
it on through
dad or
genes.
that gene,
Yes.
right, that
Yes.
gene
Yes.
pool was
Yes.
exposed to that, and it
Yeah.
becomes a part of you unconsciously and is buried deep subconsciously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
No, you're exactly right. And so he did not directly experience it, but his father did. But it would the memories is passed on to him. So that's what we're seeing in epigenetics, even when it comes to our enslaved ancestors. That a lot of those experiences and memories have been passed on to next generations, and it's impacting how our genes are expressed in DNA.
Absolutely.
So it's very, very powerful when we look at it. But one thing we also forget to talk about is what else is passed on to us is our ancestors' resilience,
Absolutely.
and that is huge for us.
Yeah.
On how that's passed on to us, and you be like, how can African Americans and descendants of slaves endure the things that they've done even today? Is because also their resilience was passed on to us, and how we can not just survive but as well as thrive. We have the propensities and the proclivities to thrive because we inherit that as well.
Yeah. So, having seen and listened to you and, really become a huge supporter of, the groundbreaking work that you do, can we talk a little bit about what your sense of what it's going to take for there to be to see a quantum leap and trauma resiliency applied into the community, right? So there's one effort, which is to educate that there is the possibility of it.
Yeah.
But what do you think it's going to take to really get to a point where there's a, you can see the impact of it happening?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, a meaty question. Got a lot of meat on that bone. Well, there's several things I'm working on. There's some stuff I haven't not unfolded, but obviously trauma resilience is that big framework. But I'm also working on creating a whole new interdisciplinary college course called neuropsycho traumatology. And I think that that's where we need to be going as well, far as it being an actual course and major in universities, where psychologists, therapists can also take this course or this class or major in neuropsycho traumatology and become future traumatologists for the nature. So I'm working on that. But what it's going to take is, I think it's going to take, the community having a level of readiness. Readiness is important because you got to at some point get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we need a framework where trauma resilient wellness can infuse in many different genres. For example, grabbing this model, should be able to put it into a school district and for education, or put it into an alternative school. And then I can grab this same trauma resilient model and talk to a warden and say, hey, put trauma-resilient wellness into your prisons and put it
Mm.
into incarceration. Now I should grab that same thing and go over into foster care and say put trauma-resilient wellness so we can address many of the traumas that families are struggling with. And I can grab the same thing and put it into a detox or a substance abuse facility and say put trauma, because 90% of individuals with substance abuse issues have unresolved childhood traumas. So they're going to have a higher propensity of relapsing because we never got to the unresolved childhood traumas in the first place. So I always saw trauma is like a virus in our nation. That's how I describe it. And we've been giving it a Tylenol too long. And so what we need to do is vaccinate it. And trauma-resilient wellness is the vaccination of trauma, which is America's new public health emergency.
Wow, that's powerful. That's a deep statement, and I couldn't agree with you more. When you see, for most of us, if you follow social media, one of the hot emerging areas, that has everyone's attention has to do with relationships.
Yes.
You got the on one side you have men who have these standards, and you have women who have their standards, and there seems to be this competition. And you look at the statistics. Marriage, the value of marriage is at an all-time low.
Yes.
The sense of individuals looking to get married and stay married for a lifetime has also it lost its value.
Yes.
And my sense of it is a lot of this is to the detriment to children, because statistics show that children who come from a two-parent household tend to do better across the board.
Yes.
And so, this sense of pursuit of happiness of the individual over what's good for the family and the children. How do you think trauma ties into that?
Oh my God.
Okay.
Man, that's a lot of meat on that bone.
That's a
Okay.
good
That's
question.
just a specific segment for another podcast. But going back to what I said, it is far easier, as Frederick said, it is far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
Yeah.
I think that because trauma is such a public health crisis, and so many, 80 to 90% of people in America have experienced at least one traumatic experience, which means you have a lot of traumatized people. So there's a lot of trauma bonding in dating and romancing and in marriages today. And there's a lot of pain and brokenness. I really believe that we need to create a trauma assessment, not just premarital counseling, but a premarital trauma assessment, so you can understand your partner's demons, dysfunctions, and disorders. A lot of that, we're not privy to that because of the fact that, one, we don't even spend enough time before we even get into a serious relationship, and it takes time for things to be exposed and to see those red flags, right? And so I'm your boy, I'm your man in 60 days. Like, really? Like, we're still just performing right now.
representative
We're
is here, right?
we're in that
Real
dating season.
Yeah.
Or I'm just trying to perform and she trying to perform. Ain't nobody really seeing red flags right now. It takes time for those demons and dysfunctions to start being exposed. And you have, all of us is flawed, so that's not my issue, including myself. But too many broken people are getting into spaces without going through their own version of healing for themselves. When you have deficits like that, then you expect that person to make you happy because you got so much unresolved trauma in your personal life. You have a deficit, a gaping hole that you're expecting this Mr. Jones to fill that only God can fill, right? So sex can't fill it, drugs can't fill it, any kind of external stimuli can't feel that. So what really brings happiness is a better healed version of yourself. So we have to take time on working on ourselves. This is the reason why there's something called a season of singleness. And a season where it's time for you to get married and build your family. Those are two different seasons. And so we live in a society where everybody got to hook up and be with each other. And then we create more trauma bonding. We create more relational traumas. And we create more brokenness on people because certain broken people got with another broken person. And of course your marriage didn't have a chance. You went in a broken marriage because both people are broken. And so it's really the best time to really work on yourself and get the better you is allowing yourself to be single for a while and work on you. This is another segment. You're going to have to invite me to come back on. And there's something called relationship addicts.
Yes.
Too many people are addicted to relationships. Just like Hennessy, like that Henny, you got some people that is addicted to just being with somebody. They don't know why they with that person. They are miserable with that person. But again, unresolved trauma means I got this space that's open, and instead of me taking the time to hold myself accountable and work on myself, I'm gonna feel her in that.
Right.
Yeah.
So now that's unfair because she can't make you fully happy. Like you share happiness together.
Yeah.
If she's happy, I'm happy. We share the happiness. But that's so unfair to ask another human being to make me something that they were never designed to give me. So we got to work on filling that space and turn it over to Denise.
Validate.
Yeah.
You're looking for that person to come in and validate. And it's, the fact that you said that there's a time to be single, that's the time to work on yourself. And, I have nieces who are younger than me and they look up to me, and I'm a single person. And one of the first things I ask someone who is interested is, have you ever been to therapy? Because as a person that's gone through what I've gone through and have overcame and continue to heal, because the process never stops.
That's right.
It's a continuous process, right?
Yeah.
I am looking for the person that's at least in that same psychological and emotional space that I'm in, where you're willing to continue the healing process and recognize that you are flawed. And a lot of what you've experienced is now a part of you, and it's going to show up in every relationship. How do I recognize that? Not only recognize that, but be able to be committed to healing, processing, and reconcile from that.
Yeah.
I like that too, because when you are, this is good, man. I don't know what you're doing today. Also, Denise too, as a fellow therapist and stuff, is that, check this out. If I don't become a better version of myself, I'm also going to continue to stay attracted to the wrong version of my future.
That's right.
So you find yourself dating the same type of people. They just look different with a different name and social security number, but it's the same person. This is the exact same person because you're not at that healed version. See, some people come and you'll slither into your life when you're vulnerable, you broken, and then your self-esteem is low. You feel like you can only be attracted to a certain person. And then when you start getting into a healed version of yourself, the next person got to have a come up. Right? You because of the fact that my emotional intelligence is higher, my vibrations is higher, my energy is at a more healthier level, right?
Did you read my diary?
No, I promise you, right? And so a lot of times we attracted to to an unhealed version of ourselves, and we stay stuck at that, and it takes many relationships. A woman has to kiss many frogs before she say, you know what?
This is the prince.
Yeah, right. So that healed version is so important when we talk about engaging in relationship. And I can't culture and as well as church put pressure on singles as if something is wrong with being single. And really, you need to get out of my business. Let God continue his surgery inside of me. Get in my mind, get in my heart healed and getting it right so that when I'm ready to date somebody. I mean, you broke, you ain't got no money. Like, dating should be the last thing on your mind. You need to be working on you, your career, getting your education. I'm being real. Let's stop all this shenanigans. At some point, you're going to have to treat this lady right and take her to a good meal. You're going to have some bread. But if you don't have that right now, that should even, and it's okay for dating not to be your priority. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that we can legitimize that there's just a season that me and God is a priority right now. So
it's a generation ago, 2 generations ago, the average marrying age was 18 to 24, you know,
Yeah.
and you'd get married, and at that time you didn't have anything,
No.
you know, and you know, in some instances you met your person while you were in college with the
Yeah.
expectation
Yeah.
that you're going to graduate next year, and
Yeah.
we'll start
Land
a
that big
family,
job.
yeah,
Yeah.
and land
Yeah.
that big job.
Hopefully.
Um, as a society, there is, it's a common practice that people are waiting, right? So, the idea is I'm going to wait till I graduate from school, maybe get my master's if I'm going to
Yeah.
that direction, get my own place, get a little bit established, and then I will look for love,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem to be working out like that,
Yeah.
and there is the thought, right? So I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna be smart about this. Is the perception, right?
Yeah.
But is it possible in that back end that some of that is kind of fear and some of that vicarious trauma, because we've seen other people in their relationships not work out, and even using the example that you brought up, Dr. Holt, that um, we need to be, in particular, if we're talking about men, that we need to get our act together, especially if we're coming from a failed marriage or a failed relationship. We need to get our act together
Yes.
so that we can position ourselves to get back into dating.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but when I look at my own personal story and experience, on paper, one might say that I wasn't ready to get back into a relationship.
Okay.
It's just that so happened that Christina and I met at the right time,
Yeah.
and that I was kind of putting back parts of my life,
Yeah.
and because I still had some vulnerability. Denise, earlier today you were talking about the lobster and how when you think of a lobster, it's got a hard shell,
Yeah.
but it goes through, for it to grow, it goes through these stages where the shell will soften and it'll become more vulnerable, and that's what allows for it to grow. Same thing with crabs. Crabs go through a season called molding,
Yep.
and that's how you get soft shell crabs, which are delicious. People fry it and eat the whole thing, right? But the fact is sometimes we have to go through those periods of vulnerability.
Yeah.
So, how is it when, how can we tell when it's, time for us to move out there in spite of the fact that we're vulnerable, or we've kind of had this period where we've fallen apart, and are still kind of dealing with our traumas?
Yeah, good question. First of all, no one is never going to be 100%. So so it's an unrealistic expectation to where I got to be 100. Because if you're 100%, there's no role for a helpmeet to come in your life.
Yeah.
Right. So that helpmeet really brings that extra layer of grace to help fulfill a man's role or a husband's role to the next level, and this is vice versa the same way. We also dealing with an era where you got women say, "I don't need a man." It's like, for what? They even say, "For what? What do I need a man for?" So and that's not really the family structure the way it was designed. A good woman also needs a good man to affirm her, to support her, protect her, provide all those different things. And that's why it takes time for a man to get himself together, because that is the role of the husband. This 50-50 stuff that people are saying, no, it's the role of the husband, to bring protection, bring peace, provision, and provide all those different things is going to be very, very important. So it do take time for us to build ourselves up so we can fill into those roles. But are you going to be 100% like, are you going to be like, making $2.5 million a year before you say, what, I think it's time now to get somebody, right? No, your partner has to have a space to be able to mold and be able to help bring extra grace and bring extra provision and security and affirmation and all those things to the table. So this is the reason why there's a certain timing for that, is all I'm saying. There's not where you got to be, a woman's going to be like 100% before she like, okay, now it's time for George to come in my life. It's like, no, there got to be a space for him, so each side of the aisle have to have a space where they can come in and help the household to be be healthy and to be prosperous and all those things. So it's going to also be some work you guys are going to be able to do together to help go to the next level. All I'm saying is there's a season where you need to be single to bring the basics, get yourself together, be able, because when the man helps bring the house, the wife makes it a home. She just bring that kind of favor, right?
Yeah.
You bring the groceries, she makes the meal, right? It just brings that extra grace, or vice versa. It can be the other way because I can cook, right? So, but I think you get what I'm saying is that you're not gonna be. It's unrealistic. Like I got to be 100% with no flaws because that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I think to add to that, I think you're never really single. Date yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Date yourself, get to know yourself, understand who you are, your likes, your dislikes,
Yeah.
what areas of your life you want to grow in. Because if you identify that for yourself, when you meet the person that is for you, you will know. Because
Yeah.
they will
Yes.
they will come into that space, as Dr. Holt
Yes,
said,
they
and
will.
they will fill
And it's
that
organic
space.
too. It's not
It's
forced.
exactly.
You don't have to manipulate it.
Exactly.
It's just it's organic. And the last thing I'll say on that, I would rather be single than be in a toxic relationship.
I get that.
Absolutely.
Here's my thing though, because you guys are preaching to the choir. I really respect every point that you guys are making. I have a lot of friends,
Okay.
and around my age, middle age, that would be great people in a relationship, but for whatever the reasons are, they just haven't found the right person, or they haven't really kind of taken that step to to really actively look for someone, right?
Yeah.
And there's this sense of like, okay, work on myself, be patient, and it's kind of a little bit sitting on the laurels, I feel, right? And when I talk to them, I'm like, well, try online dating, be a little bit more assertive, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the answers I get is like, I'm too busy, I'm in my career,
Yeah.
got this going on,
Yeah.
it's just life is lifing for me right now, so this isn't the right season.
Yeah.
Like, what am I missing in that? Like, because I hear you guys are, what you said was profound, but it's too many. It's just so many people are not in the relationships. So
Yeah. Well, is that really wrong though? Because I
Okay.
think that's what's
All right.
wrong with culture.
okay, all right,
Is that we try to put our own expectations on other people's lives and assignments and lives and seasons of life. And believe it or not, I'm just gonna be frankly.
Yeah.
Some people need to be by themselves. Some people know like they burn every relationship. So
Yeah.
I'd rather for you to still be single and self-reflect, work on yourself.
But come on,
Do what you
there's some
need to do.
people. There's some people who need to be in a relationship by themselves,
I
and there's
agree.
some people who need to be in jail.
Yeah, I do.
But
I
that
do.
doesn't necessarily mean that that's the majority of
No,
people
I'm not saying
that
that's
are
the
out
majority,
there.
but
Right,
there's
yeah.
a small group. There's a group of people that's cool with being single, and they like having their autonomy. They don't like reporting to nobody. They don't have to explain where they at, and they're good. So some people are like that, but some people need to get their therapy.
Okay,
And,
all right.
Right.
and I asked my niece when she broke up with her boyfriend that she was dating in college for about 5 or 6 years, and I said, "Well, let me ask you this: would you date you? Would you date you?"
That's a good question.
She said, "Auntie, I never thought about that." I said, "Well, you need to consider that.
Yeah.
Would you date you? Because if the answer is you don't know, and it's not emphatically yes, you have some healing to do."
Yeah.
Right?
That's
and that's
deep.
just the bottom
I
line.
like that.
Sometimes we still have some healing.
Yes,
to do.
right.
And it's better
Yeah.
to do that and
Yeah.
unpack
And it's
all
single.
your luggage and hang
Yeah.
what needs to be hung up and
Yeah.
put your shoes away
Yeah.
before taking that baggage
Yeah.
into the next relationship.
That's exactly right.
I respect
Because
that.
you might get on people's nerves. Like there's some accountability. Like your stinky socks all over the place. You're like, what are we talking about here? so it's those little habits that you talk about. Yeah, would you put up with yourself? Like do you clean up behind yourself? Believe it or not, it's gonna be an issue if you go use the bathroom. You leave the top up. That's gonna irritate that woman. Like, will you let the seat down? So pet peeves, all of that stuff, matters when you're getting with somebody. And if you're cool with that right now, then it's okay to just do you and be do what you need to do. And as you were saying, you got some friends say, man, like I really want to be with somebody, but there are some times where you do have to start slowing down if you do want to be with somebody, self-reflect and saying, can I create some space to start dating and things of that nature. So that's going to be on that person, what they want. But they also can't be self-centered and be like, I'm going to be gone 3 times a month. I'm still going to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to hang out with the boys. That's non-negotiable. You better ask me about it. Or I'm hanging out with the girl. So there's
Right.
some flexibility when you start talking about relationship and getting married, that you're going to have to start being able to be flexible in order to be compatible.
All right. We have a question from our production team. So
Yes.
Do you think people can heal in a relationship?
Yes.
It don't work like that.
Yes, no, it does.
They
You can.
absolutely can.
I'm just saying that many of our issues that there's some dysfunctions,
yeah.
it's better for you to work on that while you're single. Make no mistake though, you're going to find some more craziness when you get with your partner. You're going to be all in love and this is that. And you were like, will you pick up your underwear and pick up behind your, so you're going to have those different issues that you guys are going to have to work on together. And your partner's also to be there, like as the vows say, through sickness and in health. That's not just talking about cancer. That's also talking about depression and anxiety and those issues too. So I think a lot of time people just think it's only going to be for cardiovascular issues or that heart attack. No, I need you there when I'm suffering from becoming manic.
Yeah.
And I've been suffering from depression since I was a teenager, and now we married, and I'm having an episode. I just lost my career. She never saw a history of depression until you got laid off from your career, and she's seeing you going through an emotional downward spiral. That's new to her, right? So she's gonna she ain't gonna bail. I hope she don't bail. She want to help you get a therapist and be a support network to you as you navigate through that.
But she can only do that if she's experienced her own healing.
Yeah.
Because you can only, I think that it's easier for you to identify what's happening in other people when it's happened in you.
Yeah, yes, right. That's true.
As well.
That's true.
Right?
Too.
And so, I think it's a tactful dance that you do with finding the right partner and just knowing that this person is for me.
So, and I totally agree. And this is what we don't talk enough about. Love is not enough. It's a good start.
Yeah.
But love alone is not enough. You're going to have other dynamics at the table, like outside of financial stress. Believe it or not, it's not even infidelity. Communication is one of the number one reasons of divorce. People can't even talk to each other, right? So if you're really like don't talk to nobody, she never talked to nobody, guess what that marriage is gonna be suffering with? Day one, communication issues, right? So knowing those factors are going to be as well as important, that you start working on yourself on being open and being a little vulnerable, dropping your ego. If you're that type of person that's introverted with everybody, that ain't going to change when you find the person that you love. So that's what I'm saying. Love is a good start to build the foundation, but love is not going to fix everything, right? So you got to have those other tools at the table, your communication skills, and being able to get your finances in order, because what people be fighting over a lot of time, fighting over money, right? So going back to what grandmama and your mama told you, boy, go get your education, go get that degree. Love is gonna always be here. You're gonna find somebody, but get yourself together so that your marriage can have a stronger fighting chance.
And know each other's attachment style.
And love language.
Yeah, those
it's a lot
of valuable things. With working on ourselves, right? As a behavioral health organization, we believe that the right way to do that is by having the right type of coaching. Right type of coaching is through therapy. It is through working with educated folks who have the experience to support you in assessing what you can work on and then helping you put together a treatment plan. So from the context of if someone who is aspiring to have success in relationships, the practice of working on oneself should be tied to some form of, therapy or coaching of some magnitude. And if nothing else, some type of accountability partner.
Yes.
If you think of being in a relationship with someone and the two of you guys are honest and you're assessing, and you're being honest with yourselves and with each other, then you all will talk about how we both need to continue to work on ourselves, and we'll encourage ourselves
Yes.
to do the work. And so,
Yes. I like that accountability piece, because I was just about to say every couple almost like need mentors, need guardrails.
Yeah.
Right? If your homies are like, man, this is what she did. Bro, if I was you, I'd leave right now.
Nah.
Get your stuff. While she at work,
Yeah.
get all your stuff.
Pack up and go, right?
So you need guardrails in place, and I like that accountability piece. Is it holds you grounded?
Yeah.
That's saying, hey, when your emotions is crazy, don't make no decision.
Yeah.
That's one of the best things I could tell you. When you are emotional, do not make no decision in that space. Get to your therapist, your life coach, your mentor, and talk it out, and then with them, and then together talk it out, pray it out, whatever that looks like. But when you are emotional, and you're going to have some emotional turbulent times, that's just how life gets to life in. Every relationship go through something where life gets to life in. But one of the best advice I can tell you is when you're emotional, don't do nothing.
Yeah, Christiane and I, we have
don't do nothing.
We have a marriage counselor. We have a therapist. We started the marriage with a therapist.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want it to be the type of thing where it's okay. Yeah. We need a marriage therapist. Okay, so we're it's crisis now, right?
Right.
But we wanted to set the right.
It was
habits.
like guardrails at the beginning.
The crisis.
Exactly. And then from time to time she'll be like, I'm calling the therapist right now. We want to set this session up. And it does. So we do have our moments where she calls the police on me. Yeah, she gonna call the police on me. Yeah, but outside of that, I think for the most part, I mean, it's a healthy dynamic.
And I think that if we don't remember anything else, I think that how you maintain peace in any relationship is when you seek to understand instead of seeking to judge.
Yeah.
You seek to understand, it'll always take you down a better path, and a better path to making better decisions, right? So just seek to understand.
Yeah.
Well, this is, I so enjoy this time, and I so love being with you all and having these discussions and receiving this enlightenment and insight from the brother Damon Holt here.
Yes.
Damon, you're a prolific writer and educator, man. Please share with the audience your book here, man. Drop a little knowledge here. So
Black Trauma. Denise said she got it. She read it, so it speaks to itself. But it's on Amazon right now. It's hot right now. Black Trauma is for speaking about, how race-based trauma impact African Americans, the descendants of slaves. And we go to a lot of that, how racism, discrimination, that hyper-arousal that black people feel, dealing with racism and things of that nature, how I explain it. So me and my colleague, Dr. Dawson, is my co-author as well. She's an educator, so we put the doctor and the educator together, and this is the masterpiece that we got and we made. And so, go get the book. It's going to bless your life. Everyone that buys this book, every parent buy this book gives it to their son. That's what they've been telling me. Every mother gives it to their daughter. This book can be a book review. You can create a book club. I would love to see some black barbers in a barber shop get some men together and grab this Black Trauma and start talking about it. I like some sisters in the hairstyle shop, get some women together. Because a lot of times we think about it, we only think this can only have discussions in behavioral health environments and mental health environment. They can be very grassroots when it comes to dealing with Black trauma or any of my trauma books. So go get it. It's there. I want to make this a bestseller, so I need 50,000 of y'all to just go and just start ordering up like crazy. So go get Black Trauma, and then Amazon gonna be like, "What in the world is going on here?"
There you go. I think
but thank you for having me.
I think it was Martin Luther King who said, "Don't complain. Don't complain about how dark it is out there.
Yeah,
light a candle." So that other ones can see the light or see the way.
Yeah.
And so for those out there, this book is a candle. Get your copy of it, and inform yourself and and help those in your family and by becoming enlightened.
And you'll gain great insight into who you are
Yep.
Yes.
as an African in America. It was very prolific. I really really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
there you go.
It means a lot. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. Until the next time, it's always a pleasure to have you. You know you're going. We got to have you back.
Yeah,
So,
I'll be back on a couple months from now in May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, but we're repackaging that. It's going to be Trauma Resilience
There you go.
Month.
I
So
love
we
it.
already releasing it into the atmosphere. So everybody here in the Baltimore and the Washington, D.C. area, listen, it's going down Trauma Resiliency. So May is going to be Trauma Resilient Month for us because we want to get people out of just surviving to actually thriving.
all right. And
Good stuff.
as Pam would say on the Martin Show, peace. All right.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That was
How was
good.
that? Was that fun?
Was that
Man, that
good?
was
That was
fun.
good.